You know, they say you never forget the day your life changes forever. For most people, it's a single, cataclysmic event, a phone call in the night, a diagnosis, a sudden loss. For me, it wasn't like that. My disaster was slow. It was a quiet, imperceptible shifting of the ground beneath my feet, so gradual I didn't even feel the earthquake coming until my whole world was already in ruins. If I had to pinpoint a beginning, I'd have to go back to a Tuesday. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Isn't that just the way? The end of everything starts on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. It was the autumn of my 49th year. The air outside our Connecticut home was crisp, carrying the sweet, smoky scent of burning leaves. From my kitchen window, I watched the maple tree in the front yard, a blazing torch of red and gold against a pale blue sky. I remember the feeling of the warm mug in my hands, the simple comfort of the steam on my face. This was my life. This was the picture I had painted, stroke by careful stroke, for 28 years. The house was quiet, a rare thing. Mark, our son, was 24 and had recently moved into a sleek apartment in the city with his fiancée, Chloe. Lisa, our daughter, was 21, a whirlwind of art supplies and idealism, who still treated her old bedroom like a storage unit and her mother like a 24-hour concierge service. David, my husband, would be downstairs in his home office, already on his third conference call of the day. The rhythm of our lives was as familiar and reassuring as my own heartbeat. Ruth? His voice, calm and authoritative, echoed up the staircase. Could you come down here for a moment, dear? Dear. He always called me dear. It used to sound like an endearment. Over the years, it had morphed into something else, a placeholder, a term of mild possession, like one might use for a well-loved pet. I smoothed down my sweater and made my way downstairs. His office was a temple to his success. Dark, rich mahogany, leather-bound books that no one ever read, a sprawling desk the size of a small boat. He was standing by the window, his back to me, a silhouette against the bright morning. David, at 53, was still a commanding man. Broad-shouldered, with a full head of silver fox hair that he was terribly proud of. He turned, and his smile was a practiced, brilliant thing. "There you are," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit. I've been going over the quarterly statements with Higgins." Mr. Higgins was our financial advisor, a man who spoke in a funereal whisper, as if discussing money was a solemn, sacred rite. I sat, folding my hands in my lap, a habit I developed over years of these little summonses. "Everything looks solid," David began, his tone effortlessly confident. "Very solid. The portfolio has outperformed expectations again, but Higgins and I were talking. The new tax laws are a minefield. An absolute minefield. It's becoming a full-time job just navigating the compliance." I nodded, as I always did. Money, in our marriage, had always been David's domain. When we'd first married, he was a hungry young associate at a brokerage firm, and I was a teacher. My paycheck went towards groceries and rent, his towards what he called the future, and he was right. He built that future. He became a managing partner, then started his own firm. My small salary became irrelevant, and eventually I let my certification lapse when Lisa was born. It made sense. Why pay for childcare when I could be home, building the home he was working so hard to provide? It was a logic that felt unassailable at the time. "The point is," David continued, leaning forward on his desk, his hands steepled, "we need to simplify, consolidate. All these separate accounts, the trusts for the kids, your personal accounts, it's creating unnecessary complexity. Higgins suggests we move everything into a single, primary structure. It'll make everything cleaner, easier to manage." A tiny, almost silent alarm bell tinkled somewhere in the deep recesses of my mind. "My accounts?" I said, my voice softer than I intended. "But, My name is on those. The one from my father's inheritance. Exactly, David said, his smile widening, as if I'd just grasped a difficult concept. That's the problem. It's a separate entity, with its own set of rules. By folding it into the main family holding, we can protect it better, shield it from the tax man. It's for our future, Ruth, for our security. Our security. The two words he knew were my Achilles heel. Security was the bedrock of our life. The gated community, the alarm system, the diversified investments. It was all to keep the wolves from the door, the wolves that had haunted David's own childhood, the ones he'd sworn he'd never hear howling again. What would I need to do? I asked. Just a few signatures, he said, his tone light, dismissive. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. This just gives me the authority to talk to the institutions on your behalf. A power of attorney, so I can handle all this tedious paperwork without bothering you with every little detail. You hate this stuff anyway. I looked down at the paper. It was covered in dense, legalese text. The words swam before my eyes. Durable power of attorney. Financial and property matters. Full and absolute power. It's standard, he reassured me, clicking his expensive pen and holding it out to me. Higgins drew it up. It's just so I can talk to the bank for you, sweetheart. That's all. I looked from his face so open and reasonable to the pen in his hand. The silence in the room was broken only by the steady, expensive tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. This was the moment. This was the first grain of sand shifting. And I, in my blissful ignorance, picked up the pen. If you think it's best, David, I said, and I signed my name on the dotted line. His smile was warm, genuine. I always do, dear, I always do. He took the paper, filed it neatly in a folder, and that was that. The transaction was complete. I had just handed him the keys to my kingdom, and I didn't even know it. Later that week, I was having lunch with my aunts, Grace and Clara. It was a monthly ritual, a touchstone of sanity in my otherwise David-centric world. Auntie Grace, my mother's younger sister, was all softness and light. At 70, she still had the hopeful eyes of a girl, and she believed in the essential goodness of people with a ferocity that was both touching and, at times, woefully naive. Auntie Clara, on the other hand, was my father's sister. She was 75, built of sterner stuff, with a gaze that could strip paint and a tongue that could fillet a person at 20 paces. She had never married, had run her own successful accounting firm for 40 years, and had precisely zero tolerance for what she called nonsense. We were at a little cafe, and I was recounting the story of signing the paper, framing it as just another boring piece of adult life. And he said it would make the taxes simpler. I finished, taking a sip of my tea. Auntie Grace patted my hand. That David, always thinking. Such a good provider. You're so lucky, Ruthie, not to have to worry your pretty head about all that complicated business. But Auntie Clara had gone very still. She set her fork down with a precise click. What paper exactly did you sign, Ruth? Oh, I don't know, Clara. Some power of attorney thing, so he can talk to the bank for me. Clara's eyes narrowed. A durable power of attorney. I think that's what it said. Why, is that bad? It depends, she said, her voice a low rasp. It means it stays in effect even if you become incapacitated. It's not just for talking to the bank, Ruth. It's for being you at the bank. It gives him the power to sign your name, to withdraw your money, to sell your assets. It makes you a passenger in your own financial life. The room felt suddenly colder. Don't be dramatic, Clara. Auntie Grace chided gently. David adores her. He would never. I'm not saying he would, Clara interjected, though her tone suggested otherwise. I'm saying that a marriage should be a partnership, not a monarchy. You should always know where the money is, Ruth. Your father, God rest his soul, made sure I knew, even though I was perfectly capable of managing my own. It's about respect. It's about you having a voice. I have a voice, I said, but it sounded weak, defensive. Do you? Clara asked, not unkindly, but with a piercing directness. Or, do you just have a vote that he ultimately counts as his own? I floundered, searching for an example of my independence. I manage the household accounts. I decide on the groceries, the decor, the landscaping. Auntie Clara just looked at me, her silence more eloquent than any lecture. She picked up her fork again. Just make sure you have your own copy of that paper, Ruth. And for God's sake, keep an eye on your own credit report. A woman should never be a guest in her own life. The conversation moved on, Auntie Grace deftly steering us toward the safer waters of a neighbor's scandalous divorce, but Clara's words stuck with me, a burr in the fabric of my contentment. That night, as I lay in bed beside David, listening to his steady, untroubled breathing, I thought about what she'd said. Am I a passenger? I looked around our bedroom, the custom-made drapes, the Italian linen sheets, the art on the walls that David had chosen because it was a sound investment. It was all beautiful, tasteful, expensive. And in that moment, it all felt as substantial as a stage set. I had helped build this life, hadn't I? I had raised the children, curated the home, hosted the parties that cemented his business relationships. I had been the warm, welcoming counterpart to his sharp, ambitious edge. That was my contribution. That had value. I rolled over, pushing the uneasy thoughts away. Clara was just being Clara, cynical and suspicious. David loved me. He had built this fortress around us to keep me safe. To suggest otherwise was to betray him, to betray the life we had built together. I was being foolish. This was the foundation of our life, not sand, but solid rock. I convinced myself of that, completely and utterly. I fell asleep, wrapped in the illusion of my own security. I had no idea that the tide was already turning, and that the first waves were just beginning to lick at the walls. Auntie Clara's words, that little seed of doubt, didn't wither and die. They lay dormant in the dark soil of my mind, and every so often, something would happen to water them, to make them send out a tiny, questing root. It started with the credit card. My platinum card, the one I used for everything from groceries to gassing up the Lexus. I was at the checkout of Whole Foods, my cart piled high with organic this and artisanal that, the way David liked. I swiped the card. The machine beeped, a sharp, unhappy sound. Declined. A flush of heat crept up my neck. That was impossible. I'm so sorry, I said to the cashier, a young man with a placid, uninterested face. There must be some mistake. Can you try it again? He swiped it again, the same jarring beep. Declined. Do you have another form of payment? He asked, his tone implying he'd been through this 1,000 times with 1,000 embarrassed women. Flustered, I dug through my wallet and found my personal debit card, the one linked to the small, separate checking account my father had left me. It went through. I loaded the bags into the car, my hands trembling slightly. This was a mistake. A glitch. The bank's systems were always having problems. I called David. From the car. My card was declined at Whole Foods, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. He sighed, a sound of mild exasperation. Ah, yes, I meant to tell you, I canceled that card. You canceled it? Why? Fraud prevention, Ruth. Higgins's firm was hit with a data breach last month. He advised all his clients to cancel and reissue all their cards. I've been meaning to get to the bank to pick up the new ones. I'll do it tomorrow. It was plausible. It was even responsible. So why did it feel like a lie? Oh, I said, my anger deflating. Okay, I was embarrassed. Don't be, dear. It's just a card. Use the debit card for now. I'll take care of it. And just like that, the incident was closed. He was taking care of it. But the new card never materialized. A week later, when I asked about it, he waved a hand. It's a nightmare with the new chip technology. There's a backlog. Just use the debit card. I'll transfer more funds into that account if you need. So I did. I used my debit card for everything. And I didn't think much of it when, a month later, I needed to buy a birthday present for Lisa, a beautiful, and yes, expensive, leather satchel for her art supplies. The debit card was declined. This time, the panic was colder, sharper. I was at a boutique in the city, and Lisa was with me. Her face fell. "It's okay, Mom," she said quickly, though her disappointment was a physical presence between us. I called David, my heart hammering against my ribs. The debit card was declined. At the Galleria, with Lisa. "Ruth, calm down," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I can hear you're upset. There's a perfectly simple explanation. I've been rebalancing the accounts, moving money into higher yield instruments. I must have let the balance in that checking account dip too low. My fault entirely. I'll transfer $50,000 into it today. Will that see you through?" $50,000. He said it so casually, as if he were offering to toss me a $5 bill. The sheer amount, meant to soothe me, instead had the opposite effect. Why was he putting $50,000 into a small, everyday checking account? It was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It didn't make sense. "David, I'd like to see the statements," I said, the words feeling foreign and dangerous on my tongue. "For all the accounts. I'd like to understand what's going on." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was only a second or two, but it was heavy, loaded. "Of course you can," he said, his tone shifting, becoming slightly wounded. "But Ruth, you know how complex it is. It would take me hours to explain the asset allocation models, the tax sheltering strategies. You'd be bored to tears. This is what I do so you don't have to worry about it. Do you not trust me to manage our family's security?" And there it was, the master stroke. He had framed my perfectly reasonable request as a betrayal of trust. He had made me the villain, the nagging, suspicious wife. "It's not about trust, David," I said, my conviction wavering. "It's about," Clara said. "Ah," he said, and I could hear the dismissive smile in his voice. "Auntie Clara, the patron saint of spinsters and skeptics. Look, dear, I appreciate her concern, but her world is black and white. Ours isn't. Managing wealth at this level is a gray area, full of complicated, necessary maneuvers. Maneuvers that have given you the life you have." He had backed me into a corner. To pursue it was to side with Clara against him, to be ungrateful for the life he'd built, to be the naive, simple-minded wife who didn't understand the complex world of her brilliant husband. I know," I mumbled, defeated. "Just transfer the money, please. Lisa is waiting. I'll do it right now. And Ruth, try not to listen to Clara so much. She's never understood what a real partnership looks like." I hung up the phone, my cheeks burning with shame. I had confronted him, and I had failed. Miserably. I turned to Lisa, forcing a bright smile. "All sorted. Daddy's just moving money around. He's going to transfer some in now." Lisa, my sweet, perceptive girl, looked at me not with excitement about the satchel, but with a quiet, searching concern. "Are you okay, Mom? You look pale." "I'm fine, honey, just a little flustered." I bought the satchel, the transaction now feeling tainted, and we left. The next day, true to his word, $50,000 was in my account. The problem was solved. But the crack had widened. I found myself watching David more closely. I noticed how he now angled his laptop screen away from me when he worked in the living room. I noticed the new password he had put on his phone. I noticed the way he would end phone conversations abruptly when I walked into the room. The unease grew into a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety, a soundtrack to my days. I decided I needed to talk to Clara again, but without Grace's softening influence. I invited her over for coffee, under the pretext of getting her opinion on some documents from my father's old estate. She arrived, sharp-eyed and wrapped in a no-nonsense trench coat. She surveyed the grand foyer, the sweeping staircase, with a critical eye. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. It's very polished, Ruth. Doesn't it feel like a museum sometimes? I led her into the kitchen, the one room I'd fought to make feel cozy, with its warm August stove and the herb garden on the windowsill. I poured the coffee and then, my hands shaking, I told her everything. The canceled card, the declined debit card, the $50,000, the wounded silence when I asked for statements. Clara listened, her expression granite. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, a tear of frustration and fear escaping down my cheek, she reached out and covered in them bright my hand with hers. Her skin was papery and cool. "Oh, my dear girl," she said, and her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "You are not being foolish. Your instincts are screaming at you. Listen to them." "But what do I do?" I whispered. "He makes me feel like I'm crazy. Like I'm betraying him by asking simple questions." "That," Clara said, her eyes turning to flint, "is what manipulators do. They gaslight, they make you doubt your own reality. Now, you listen to me. First, do you have a copy of that power of attorney you signed?" I shook my head, miserably. "Right. Tomorrow, you go to his office, and you tell him you need a copy for your records. You have every right to it. If he refuses or hedges, you'll have your answer. Second, you are going to get a copy of your credit report. All 3 bureaus. Today, we'll do it on my laptop. I want to see if he's taken out any new lines of credit in your name." The thought was so terrifying, so alien, I felt nauseous. "He wouldn't." "Ruth," Clara said, her tone brooking no argument. "Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Always. Now go get your laptop." An hour later, sitting at my kitchen table, the world I knew shattered for the second time. There, on the screen, was my credit report. And there, listed under my name, were 3 new lines of credit I knew nothing about. A $100,000 home equity line of credit on our house, a $50,000 personal loan, and a new credit card with a $75,000 limit, with cash advances taken out against it that were almost maxed out. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. I don't understand," I stammered. "Why? We have money. He told me we have money. Why would he do this?" Clara's face was grim. "2 reasons. Either he's in serious financial trouble he's been hiding from you, and he's leveraging every asset, including you, to stay afloat. Or," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "he's siphoning. He's moving assets and creating debt in your name to leave you holding the bag." The bag. I felt like I was moving through thick fog. The bag of nothing, Ruth. The bag of debt and liability. While he walks away clean, with the real assets hidden somewhere you can't touch. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping loudly on the marble floor. I ran to the sink and dry heaved, my body revolting against the horrific truth being presented to me. It couldn't be. This was David, the man I'd slept beside for 28 years. The father of my children. He was a pillar of the community. This was the stuff of lurid television movies, not my life. "I have to confront him," I said, wiping my mouth with a trembling hand. "No," Clara said, her voice sharp. "Not yet. You have proof now, but it's not enough. If you confront him now, he'll just spin another elaborate story. He'll say he was consolidating debt, or it was for a secret investment for you, a surprise. He'll make you feel small and stupid again. You need more. You need to be smart." "What do I do?" I asked, feeling like a child. "You play the part," she said. "You be the Ruth he expects. The trusting, oblivious wife. You go about your life. But you start looking. You look for bank statements, for files, for anything you can find. You memorize account numbers. You take pictures with your phone. You become a spy in your own home. The idea was abhorrent. It felt like a profound violation of the vows I'd taken. For better or for worse. But wasn't this the worst? This deceit? This financial infidelity that felt, in that moment, even more painful than the carnal kind? That night, I lay in bed next to David, a chasm of lies between us. He was reading a biography of some titan of industry, utterly at peace. I was frozen, my mind racing, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I was supposed to be his partner, his wife. And now, my aunt was telling me I had to become a detective, building a case against my own husband. I looked at his profile in the dim light, at the man I thought I knew. Who are you? The question screamed silently in my head. What have you done with my husband? What have you done with our life? The foundation wasn't just cracked, it was crumbling. And I was only just beginning to feel the fall. They say when you're in a car crash, time slows down. That's a lie. Time doesn't slow, it shatters. It breaks into a million sharp, jagged pieces that fly past your face, each one a frozen image of the life you were living a heartbeat before. For me, the car crash didn't happen on a road. It happened in my living room, on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon, with the scent of lemon polish in the air and a pot of potato soup simmering on the stove. I was thinking about Clara's words, about being a spy in my own home. For a week, I had been trying to muster the courage to snoop. Every time David left his office door ajar, my heart would leap into my throat. I'd take a step towards it, then lose my nerve, convincing myself I was being paranoid, that Clara's cynicism had infected me. The tension was a live wire under my skin, humming constantly. I was jumping at the sound of the mail truck, at the ping of my phone. I felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, but I had no idea the entire closet was about to fall on top of me. The phone rang. It was 3:17 p.m. I remember because I had just glanced at the clock on the stove, thinking I should turn the soup down to a simmer. The caller ID showed David's office number. My first, foolish thought was that he was working late again, and my stomach clenched with a mixture of disappointment and relief. Disappointment for another lonely evening. Relief that I wouldn't have to sit across from him and pretend. But it wasn't David. It was Evelyn, his assistant. Her voice was thin, stretched tight. Over a sob she was desperately trying to hold back. Ruth, you need to come to the hospital, now." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island, the cool granite, the only solid thing in a suddenly fluid universe. "Evelyn, what's happened? Is it David? Is he hurt?" It was a car, a collision. On the Merritt Parkway, they brought him to Norwalk Hospital. "Ruth, you need to come right now." I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember grabbing my purse or my keys. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. My body operated on a primal automated pilot, while my mind was a roaring white noise of denial. No. This isn't happening. This is a dream, a bad dream. I'll wake up. He's fine. He's at the office. He's fine. But the emergency room was real. The harsh, fluorescent lights were real. The smell of antiseptic and fear was real. A social worker with kind, tired eyes met me, her hand on my arm, guiding me to a small, private room. The bad news room. I knew it instantly. There were boxes of tissues on every flat surface. "Mrs. Thorne," she began, and I knew from her tone, from the profound pity in her gaze, that my life was over. David was gone. A massive coronary, the doctor suspected. He'd lost control of the car, swerved across the median. It was instantaneous. They assured me of that. He didn't suffer, as if that was a comfort, as if the sheer, violent suddenness of it wasn't its own unique form of torture. The avalanche had hit. The next few days were a blur of nightmarish tableau. Mark, his face ashen and rigid with a son's grief, taking charge, making the arrangements. Lisa, collapsing against me, her sobs racking both our bodies. The funeral home, the ghastly selection of a casket. The endless parade of faces at the wake, colleagues, clients, neighbors, their words of sympathy, a meaningless drone. I moved through it all like a ghost, encased in a shell of shock. I was the grieving widow. I played the part perfectly. The numbness was a blessing. It was about a week after the funeral, when the casseroles had stopped arriving and the house had fallen into a deafening silence, that the second avalanche hit. This one was quieter, more insidious, but it would bury me just as completely. I was sitting at David's desk, a task I'd been dreading, starting to sort through his things. I had to begin the probate process, notify banks, all the grim administrative duties of death. My first order of business was to find our main checking account statements so I could pay the mortgage, the utilities, the simple, mundane acts of keeping a life afloat. I logged into our joint banking portal. The username and password were saved on his computer. I clicked, the screen loaded. Account status, frozen. I blinked. Frozen? Why would it be frozen? Because of his death? That didn't make sense. I tried to access the savings account. Account status, frozen. A cold dread, colder than the grief, began to seep into my bones. I started clicking frantically. The money market account. Frozen. The brokerage account. Frozen. Every single account I had ever known about, every pillar of our financial life, was locked. A fortress with the drawbridge raised and the gates sealed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I found the number for the bank and called, my voice a reedy, frightened thing as I explained who I was. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne," the bank manager said, his voice professionally somber. The accounts were frozen per the instructions of the executor of the estate. The executor, but I'm his wife. I'm the executor. There was a pause, the rustling of papers. "I'm showing here that the named executor is a Mr. Arthur Higgins, and the secondary executor is a Mark Thorne." The room swam. Higgins, our financial advisor, and Mark, my son. My breath hitched in my chest. That can't be right. There must be a mistake. Can you tell me the balance? On the checking account, just before it was frozen? Another pause. As of the date of death, the balance was $1,247. I laughed, a short, hysterical, barking sound. That's impossible. There should be over $200,000 in that account. You have the wrong account. This is the joint account for David and Ruth Thorne, ending in 4,481. The balance is $1,247. A series of large transfers were made in the weeks leading up to Mr. Thorne's passing. I dropped the phone. It clattered on the mahogany desk. I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. A series of large transfers. Clara's words echoed in my skull. He's siphoning. I stumbled out of the office and up the stairs to our bedroom, to my closet, to the small, fireproof lockbox where I kept my passport, my social security card, and the few pieces of jewelry my mother had left me. I fumbled with the combination, my fingers numb. I flung it open. There, on top, was a stack of papers. Neat, legal, terrifying. I pulled them out. It was a copy of David's will, the real will. Not the simple one we had made together years ago, leaving everything to each other, then to the children. This was thick, complex. My eyes scanned the pages, not comprehending the legalese at first. Then, the phrases started to leap out, each one a punch to the gut. Bequeath my interest in the property at 17 Crestview Drive to my son Mark Thorne. Establish the Thorne Family Trust, with Arthur Higgins as trustee. All stock holdings and business assets to be liquidated, and the proceeds directed to said trust. For the care and maintenance of my wife, Ruth Thorne, the trustee may, at his sole discretion, disburse a monthly allowance. a monthly allowance. I was a beneficiary. A dependent. Like a child. Or a pet. And then I saw it. The date. The will was signed 6 months ago. Around the time he'd had me sign the power of attorney. It was all a plan. A cold, calculated, meticulously executed plan. The avalanche wasn't an act of God. It was an act of David. I sank to the floor of my walk-in closet, surrounded by the expensive clothes he had bought me. The tangible proof of the life he had provided, and was now, from beyond the grave, taking away. The numbness shattered, and in its place came a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. I was a ghost in a museum, and the curator had just turned off the lights and locked the doors. I was 53 years old, a widow. And in the space of a single phone call and a discovered document, I had become a pauper in my own home. Grief is a wild animal. In the beginning, it's a snarling, ravenous beast that consumes you whole, leaving no room for any other feeling. But then, it changes. It retreats, becomes a silent predator that stalks you in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness to pounce. In the days after discovering the will and the frozen accounts, my grief for David was joined by a new, even more terrifying companion, sheer, gut-wrenching panic. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The walls of the house, once my sanctuary, felt like they were pressing in on me, a beautiful gilded cage. Every ring of the doorbell, every ping of my phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Was it a bill collector? The bank? The new masters of my fate, Arthur Higgins and my own son, coming to formally deliver my sentence? I had to tell the children. The thought filled me with a fresh kind of dread. How do you tell your son that his father, the man he idolized, had secretly disinherited his mother and made him a co-conspirator in the act? How do you tell your daughter that her future, the safety net she had always taken for granted, had been yanked away? I called them over, my throat tight with a shame that wasn't mine to bear. We sat in the living room, the three of us, on the same overstuffed linen sofa where we'd opened Christmas presents just a few months before. The air was thick with unspoken words. "There's something I need to talk to you both about," I began, my voice cracking. "It's about the estate." Mark, ever the practical one, leaned forward. "It's okay, Mom. Higgins and I are on top of it. We've started the probate process. It's complicated, but we'll get it all sorted." "That's just it, Mark," I said, clutching a throw pillow to my chest like a shield. "I found a new will. Dad's most recent will." Lisa looked confused. "A new one? What does it say?" I took a deep, shuddering breath and told them. I told them about the accounts being frozen, about the paltry balance, about the trust, with Higgins as the trustee, about the monthly allowance, and finally, about the house being left solely to Mark. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Mark's face went through a rapid series of transformations. Confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and then, to my horror, a flicker of something that looked uncomfortably like validation. "He left me the house," Mark said, his voice low. "That's what you took from this." Lisa's voice was a whip crack. "Mark, he cut Mom out. He made her a beggar in her own home. What is wrong with you?" "It's not like that, Lisa," Mark snapped, his composure returning, looking every inch his father's son. "You don't understand. Dad was a strategist. He was protecting the assets. From estate taxes. From potential lawsuits. This is how it's done at this level. The trust, the discretionary payments, it's for Mom's own protection, so she doesn't have to worry about the big picture." I stared at him. He was parroting David's words, David's logic. He had been groomed for this. My son had been turned into my jailer, and he didn't even see the bars. "Protection. From what, Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I have no money. I can't access any of our accounts. The credit cards are canceled. How am I supposed to buy groceries?" Pay the property taxes on your house? He had the decency to look uncomfortable. Higgins is setting up a stipend. It'll be deposited into your personal account. It's a generous amount for living expenses. A stipend? Lisa cried, jumping to her feet. She's our mother, not a junior employee. How can you be so cold? This is disgusting. You're being emotional, Lisa, Mark said, his tone condescending. You always are. You don't understand finance. Dad knew what he was doing. The conversation devolved into a screaming match, a chasm of betrayal and misunderstanding opening up between my children, with me stranded in the middle. Mark left, angry and defensive. Lisa collapsed beside me, sobbing with a rage I couldn't yet access. It's going to be okay, baby, I whispered, stroking her hair, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. After she left, the silence returned, heavier than before. I was alone, truly alone. I wandered back into David's office, the scene of the crime. The desk was a monument to his deception. I had to know more. I had to understand the scope of the ruin. I started opening drawers, my movements frantic, desperate. I pulled out files, labeled tax returns, investment portfolios, property deeds. It was all a facade. The numbers in the statements were from years ago. The deeds were copies. It was a stage set, just like the rest of the house. And then I found it. The bottom drawer on the right-hand side was locked. A small, sturdy file drawer. I pulled at it, rattled it. Nothing. A surge of futile anger washed over me. I yanked open the other drawers, searching for a key, tearing through paper clips and rubber bands and expensive pens. Nothing. Driven by a fury I didn't know I possessed, I went to the garage, found a heavy crowbar, and marched back into the office. I didn't care about the damage. I didn't care about the beautiful desk. I jammed the curved end of the crowbar into the slim gap above the drawer and leaned my whole weight into it. The wood splintered with a sickening crack. I pried again, and the lock gave way with a metallic snap. The drawer slid open. It was mostly empty. Just a few items. A velvet box containing a pair of diamond earrings I had never seen before. A passport. I opened it. It was David's photo, but the name was different. Robert Shea. My blood ran cold. A second passport. How many lives had he been living? And then, at the very back of the drawer, was a single, linen envelope. It was addressed to me, Ruth. In a handwriting I didn't recognize, a messy, rushed scrawl, unlike David's precise penmanship. It was postmarked over a year ago. And across the front, in David's hand, was written one word, "Unfounded." He had received it. He had opened it. He had read a letter addressed to me, deemed it unfounded, and hidden it away in a locked drawer. The violation took my breath away. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. Dear Ruth, you don't know me, and I have no right to write this letter. My name is Ben Carter. I was David's business partner, years ago, before Thorne Financial. We started Carter and Thorne together. I'm writing this because I heard through the grapevine that David is doing very well for himself, and you along with him. I'm glad for you, Ruth, truly. But my conscience won't let me rest. The way our partnership ended, it wasn't as David described. He didn't just buy me out. He systematically funneled our company's assets into a separate entity he'd created, then presented me with financial statements showing the company was nearly bankrupt. He forced me out for pennies on the dollar. A month later, he dissolved Carter and Thorne and launched Thorne Financial, with all the clients and capital he'd hidden. He ruined me, Ruth. He took everything I had. I'm not writing for money or for revenge. That ship has sailed. I'm writing because if he could do that to his partner, his friend, the man he started it all with, I felt you had a right to know the character of the man you are married to. A man who builds his castle on sand will always be digging, always be shoring up the foundations, and he will not care whose land he steals to do it. Please, be careful, Look after yourself. With regret, Ben Carter. I read it once, then again, and a third time. The paper fluttered from my hand and drifted to the floor. This was the man, this was the blueprint. The betrayal of Ben Carter wasn't an anomaly, it was his practice run. The hidden assets, the false financials, the ruthless exploitation of trust. He had honed his craft on his partner, and then, decades later, he had performed the masterpiece on me. The grief finally broke, but it wasn't the clean, sad grief of a widow. It was a black, toxic torrent of horror and revulsion. I ran to the bathroom and vomited, heaving until there was nothing left but bile and tears. I had shared my life, my bed, my body with a stranger. A brilliant, charming, utterly soulless predator. I crawled into the shower, still in my clothes, and turned the water on as hot as I could bear, scrubbing at my skin as if I could wash away the contamination of his touch, the memory of his lies. I sobbed there, on the tiled floor, until the water ran cold. The unopened letter hadn't just given me information. It had given me a truth so devastating it threatened to unmoor me completely. David hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my past, he had stolen the narrative of my own life. Every memory, every anniversary, every quiet moment of companionship was now suspect, tainted by the poison of his duplicity. I had lost my husband. I had lost my financial security. I had lost the trust of my son, and, now, sitting on the wet bathroom floor, I felt I had lost my very mind. The foundation wasn't just sand. It was quicksand, and I was sinking fast, with no one to hear my screams. There is a special kind of silence that follows a cataclysm. It's not peaceful, it's the silence of held breath, of a world waiting to see what will collapse next. For a week after finding Ben Carter's letter, I moved through the house like a phantom. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't open the curtains. The world outside had become a hostile country, and I was a refugee behind my own lines. The first stipend from the Thorne Family Trust arrived in my personal account. $5,000. Arthur Higgins's idea of generous living expenses for a woman living in a $5 million home with property taxes that were $25,000 a year. It was an insult, a deliberate demonstration of my new, diminished status. It was also a lifeline, and the shame of needing it burned like acid. The money forced me into the world. I had to go to the grocery store. I had to buy gas. Every time I swiped my debit card, I felt the eyes of the cashier, of the people in line behind me, judging me. I knew it was irrational, but I felt branded. Fraud, imposter, pauper. It was on one of these grim errands, loading bags into the trunk of my car, which was still in David's name, which meant it technically belonged to the estate, which meant it belonged to Mark and Higgins, that my phone rang. It was Mark. "Mom, Chloe and I are coming over this afternoon. We need to talk about the house." His tone was all business. "No, how are you holding up, Mom?" No warmth, just agenda. The panic, which had become a constant, low-grade hum, spiked into a siren. "What about the house, Mark?" "We'll discuss it when we get there. Around 4. He hung up. I stood in the supermarket parking lot, the sun glinting off the windshields of 100 other normal cars belonging to normal people with normal lives, and I felt the ground lurch beneath me once more. The house. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. What could they possibly want? To move in? To sell it? I called Auntie Clara, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. "They're coming for the house, Clara," I blurted out as soon as she answered. She listened as I recounted Mark's cold, brief call. Her silence on the other end was more frightening than any outburst. "Ruth," she said finally, her voice grim. "You need to be ready. Do not let them bully you. Do not sign anything. Not a single piece of paper. You call me the second they try to pressure you. Do you understand?" "I understand," I whispered, feeling like a child preparing for a scolding. At 4 o'clock sharp, the doorbell chimed. its cheerful tone a mockery. I opened the door to find Mark and his fiancée, Chloe. They were a perfect, glossy magazine couple. Mark in a crisp polo shirt and chinos, Chloe in a sheath dress that probably cost more than my monthly stipend, her blonde hair a perfect sheet, her smile a sharp, practiced curve. "Hi, Mom," Mark said, brushing past me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't connect. "Ruth, you look tired," Chloe said, her voice syrupy with false concern. "You really should take better care of yourself." They settled themselves on the living room sofa, side by side, a united front. I took the armchair opposite, feeling like a defendant in my own home. "So," Mark began, clearing his throat, "Chloe and I have been thinking about the future. With the baby coming, our apartment is just too small." The words hit me like a physical blow. The baby?" Chloe's smile widened, her hand drifting to her stomach, which I now noticed had a slight, proud curve. "Yes, we were going to wait to tell you, but it felt like the right time. We're due in November. It's a boy. We're going to name him David. Another David, eh? A new generation to carry on the name of the man who had destroyed me." The cruelty of it, intentional or not, took my breath away. "That's wonderful news," I managed to choke out, the social script overriding my devastation. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Mark said, his chest puffing out. "Which brings us to the house. This place is perfect for a family. The yard, the neighborhood, the schools. It's what Dad would have wanted, for his grandson to grow up here." He was using the baby, using his father's memory, as weapons. "What are you saying, Mark?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "We think it makes sense for you to move into something smaller, more manageable. A condo, maybe. We've even found a lovely senior community in Danbury that has..." "A senior community?" I repeated, the words tasting like dust. "I'm 53 years old, Mark. That has great amenities," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "And it would free up this asset. The probate process is complicated, but since Dad left the house to me, we can start the transition. We've drawn up a simple agreement. You sign over your life interest, it's a legal term, don't worry about it, and we handle the rest. We'll even cover your moving expenses and the first year's condo fees." He pulled a document from his leather messenger bag and slid it across the coffee table towards me. It was several pages long, thick with dense text. I looked from the paper to my son's face. This wasn't the little boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd stayed up with, nursing heartbreak over a failed algebra test. This was a stranger. A calculating, cold-eyed stranger who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. "You want me to sign away my right to live in my own home?" I said, each word measured. "The home I've lived in for 22 years? The home where I raised you?" "It's not your home, Mom," Chloe said, her sweet tone hardening. "Not legally, it's Mark's. We're trying to be generous here. We're offering you a clean break." A clean break. A laugh, hollow and broken, escaped my lips. "You call being evicted from my life a clean break? No one is evicting you," Mark said, his patience wearing thin. "We're offering a solution. Be reasonable. You can't afford the taxes on this place. You can't afford the upkeep. What are you going to do when the roof needs replacing? The stipend won't cover it. This is the only logical path forward." Logical. It was his father's word. The word used to dismiss emotion, to invalidate feeling, to bulldoze over human connection. "Get out," I whispered. "Mom, don't be emotional. Let's talk about this like adults. Get out." I roared, the sound tearing from a place of primal fury I didn't know I possessed. I stood up, my entire body trembling. "Get out of my house." Mark stood, his face flushing with anger. "It's my house. You need to face reality. Dad knew you couldn't handle this. He was protecting you from yourself." The words were a killing frost. Protecting you from yourself. The final, twisted justification for stripping me of my agency, my dignity, my home. Chloe stood, gathering her purse, her expression one of pure contempt. "We'll give you some time to calm down and see sense, Ruth, but the offer won't stand forever. The market is hot right now." They walked to the door. Mark paused on the threshold, not looking back at me. "Think about your grandson, Mom. Think about what's best for the family." Then they were gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence they left behind was more terrible than any argument. I stood there, in the center of the room my son had just claimed as his own, and I felt something inside me break for good. It wasn't my heart that had already been pulverized. It was the last fragile thread of hope that family would prevail. I didn't call Clara. I didn't call Grace. I walked slowly, deliberately, to the kitchen. I took the beautiful, hand-blown water glass from the cupboard, the one from a set David and I had bought on a trip to Venice a lifetime ago. I held it up, looking at the way the light played through its imperfections. And then, with a calm I found terrifying, I threw it against the wall. The shattering crash was the most honest sound I had heard in weeks. The shards of glass glittered on the Italian tile floor like fallen stars. I left them there, a monument to the breaking point. I didn't clean them up. I didn't cry. I felt emptied out, a vessel that had been filled to the brim with grief, terror, and betrayal, and was now hollow. The silence in the house was no longer threatening. It was expectant. It was waiting for me to decide what happened next. The decision was made for me 3 days later. The doorbell rang again, and this time, it was a uniformed courier with a thick, legal-sized envelope. My name was typed on the label. I knew what it was before I even opened it. The weight of it, the official feel of the paper, it screamed of lawyers and courtrooms. I carried it to the kitchen table, stepping over the glass, and slit it open with a steak knife. The heading alone made my vision swim: Petition for Voluntary Administration and Determination of Heirship. It was a lawsuit. My son, through his lawyer Arthur Higgins, was suing me. Suing to have the will validated, to have himself formally declared the sole owner of the house, and to have me, the widow, formally evicted. The language was cold, bureaucratic, reducing my life, my marriage, my home, to a series of case numbers and legal citations. It referred to me as the respondent, a party in opposition. My own child had made me his legal adversary. The numbness shattered. This was no longer a family dispute, it was a war. And I had just been served my conscription papers. I called Lisa first. She was at her studio apartment in the city, and she listened, her horror a palpable thing through the phone line. "He sued you." "Mom, I'm coming home, right now." Next, I called Auntie Clara. I read her the first paragraph of the petition. Her response was a string of words I hadn't heard since my father stubbed his toe on a piece of farm equipment 50 years ago. The unmitigated gall, she finally seethed. "That little weasel Higgins and your son, they think you're going to roll over. Well, we'll see about that. You are not spending another night in that mausoleum. You're coming to my house." "No, Clara, I can't impose." "You're not imposing. You're retreating to a secure base. This is a tactical move, Ruth. You leave that house, you send a message. You are not clinging. You are not desperate. You are regrouping. Pack a bag. Now." An hour later, Lisa's beat-up Volkswagen Jetta screeched to a halt in my driveway. She burst through the front door, her face flushed, her eyes blazing. She took one look at the broken glass on the floor and the legal papers on the table and wrapped me in a fierce, protective hug. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." We packed 2 large suitcases with my clothes, my photo albums, the few pieces of my own family's jewelry. It felt surreal, selecting fragments of a life to take with me, like choosing which limbs to save in a disaster. I was leaving behind furniture, art, the grand piano I never learned to play, the set of china for 12 that I used twice a year. It was all just stuff. The soul of the home had already been extinguished. As we were carrying the bags to the car, a sleek black sedan pulled up. Mark got out, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "What's going on? Where are you going?" Lisa stepped in front of me, a lioness defending her cub. "She's leaving. Since you're so eager to have the place to yourself, you can have it. Congratulations, Mark. You got what you wanted." "I didn't want this," he shouted, his composure cracking. "I wanted her to be reasonable. I was trying to find a solution." "A solution?" Lisa shot back, her voice trembling with rage. "You served her with legal papers. You and that vulture you're marrying and that snake Higgins. You're tearing this family apart for a house." "Dad left it to me," he yelled, jabbing a finger towards the building. "He trusted me with it. He knew she'd get emotional, that she wouldn't understand." "Understand what? That her husband was a lying, cheating monster? That her son is a heartless puppet? Don't you talk about Dad that way." Mark's face was contorted, a frightening imitation of his father's rage. "He was a great man, he built all of this. And you and Mom, you just spent it. You never appreciated the pressure he was under, the sacrifices he made." I stood there, listening to my children tear each other apart on the manicured lawn, their shouts echoing in the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. Curtains twitched in the house across the street. This was the final, public humiliation. The Thorne family's dirty laundry, aired for all to see. "That's enough," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through their fury. They both turned to look at me. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the little boy who was terrified of being a disappointment, the young man who had craved his father's approval above all else. David had given it to him, but at a terrible price. He had bought my son's soul with a deed to a house. "The house is yours, Mark," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You've won. I hope it keeps you warm. I hope little David grows up to love it as much as you do. But you have lost your mother, and you have lost your sister. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember the price you paid." I turned my back on him, on the house, on my entire former life. I got into Lisa's car without another word. I didn't look back as we drove away. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, watching my old life vanish in the rearview mirror. Auntie Clara's house was the antithesis of mine. A small, sturdy Cape Cod on a modest plot of land, filled with overstuffed floral armchairs, crocheted blankets, and the faint, comforting scent of lemon oil and ginger. It was a house that had been lived in, loved in, it had roots. Clara didn't offer platitudes. She showed me to the small, sunlit guest room, put the kettle on, and said, "Right. First thing tomorrow, we find you a lawyer, a shark. Not one of those country club partners Higgins plays golf with. A barracuda." That night, lying in the single bed under a heavy, hand-stitched quilt, I stared at the ceiling. The fight-or-flight adrenaline had faded, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I had lost my husband, my home, my financial security, and now, it seemed, my son. I had hit what I thought was rock bottom. But as I lay there in the quiet dark, a strange thing happened. A feeling, faint at first, like the first green shoot pushing through scorched earth. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't hope. It was something simpler, more fundamental. It was the feeling of my own weight in the bed, the sound of my own breath, the knowledge that, for the first time in perhaps 30 years, no one was lying to me. No one was manipulating me. The war had begun, yes. The future was a terrifying blank. But the house was divided, and in the dividing, I had been forced onto my own 2 feet. And I was still standing. The first few days at Auntie Clara's were a study in surreal dislocation. I, who had presided over a grand, silent house, now lived in a cozy, bustling one. The floorboards creaked with purpose. The refrigerator hummed a comforting, familiar tune. Clara didn't tiptoe around my grief. She marched straight through it, her no-nonsense presence a grounding wire in the storm of my life. Her first Order of business, was the lawyer. We need Eleanor Vance, she announced over a breakfast of strong coffee and toast. She's expensive, she's brutal. And she hates Arthur Higgins. He screwed her out of a client 20 years ago. And she's been waiting for a chance to return the favor ever since. Eleanor Vance's office was in a stark, modern building in Stamford, a world away from the wood-paneled, gentleman's club aesthetic of David's and Higgins' world. The office was all glass and steel, with sharp angles and a view of the hard, gray river. Eleanor herself matched the decor. She was in her late 50s, with a severe, dark bob, eyes the color of flint, and a handshake that could crack walnuts. She didn't offer sympathy, she offered a yellow legal pad. Start from the beginning, Ruth. Don't leave anything out. Treat me like I'm the dumbest person on earth. Assume I know nothing. So I talked for 2 hours, I poured it all out. The power of attorney, the canceled cards, the frozen accounts, the hidden will, Ben Carter's letter, Mark's betrayal, the lawsuit. I showed her the documents I had, the credit report, a photo of the will I'd taken with my phone, Ben Carter's letter. She listened, her expression unchanging, her pen scratching across the pad. When I finished, drained and trembling, she set the pen down with a precise click. Okay, she said. This is a classic case of financial infidelity and post-mortem economic abuse. Higgins and your son are relying on your grief and your supposed ignorance to steamroll you. They've made a critical error. What's that? I asked, my voice small. They underestimated you. And they've now given me, and by extension the probate court, a reason to pry open every single financial record David Thorne ever touched. The voluntary administration petition is a gift. It invites scrutiny. A thin, predatory smile touched her lips. We're going to give them scrutiny. She outlined her plan. We would file a counter-petition alleging undue influence, lack of capacity, and fraud. We would demand a full forensic accounting of David's business and personal finances for the last 10 years. We would subpoena Higgins's records. We would bury them in paper and force them to justify every transaction. It will be ugly, Eleanor warned. It will be expensive, and it will take time. But they've left you with no other choice. You're not fighting for a house, Ruth. You're fighting for the truth. And in my experience, the truth is a weapon they cannot withstand. I signed the retainer agreement, my hand shaking only a little. The retainer was a staggering amount, most of the money I had left from my father's inheritance. It felt like betting my last dollar on a single desperate hand of poker. But Clara was right. Eleanor was a barracuda, and I needed one. The wheels of the legal machine began to turn, slow and grinding. The day settled into a strange new routine. Mornings were spent with Eleanor or her associates, going over endless lists of questions, identifying assets, trying to remember the names of David's business contacts. Afternoons were a fog of anxiety, waiting for the next piece of bad news. Evenings were spent with Clara and, when she could get away, Lisa, who had become my fiercest defender and most loyal companion. It was during one of these long, tense afternoons, about 3 weeks after I'd moved in, that my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I usually let them go to voicemail, hounded as I was by debt collectors and nosy reporters who'd caught wind of the Society page scandal, but something made me answer. Hello? Is this Ruth Thorne? A woman's voice, quiet, hesitant. Yes, who is this? My name is, it doesn't matter. I used to work for your husband. At Thorne Financial. I was let go about 8 months ago. My grip on the phone tightened. Every sense was suddenly on high alert. I see. I heard about what's happening, with the will, with Arthur Higgins. She took a shaky breath. I can't stand by and watch this. What he did to you, it's not right. What who did? I asked, my heart hammering. David? David, yes, but Arthur, too. He knew. He helped. The world seemed to shrink to the sound of her voice on the phone. Helped with what? The transfers, the offshore accounts, the other expenses. A cold dread, different from any I'd felt before, seeped into my veins. What other expenses? There was a long pause. I could hear her wrestling with herself, the fear of reprisal battling with her conscience. There's a reason the corporate accounts were always so creative. A reason he needed so much liquid cash that wasn't on the books. He had another life, Mrs. Thorne. A second life he was funding. The words landed, not like a blow, but like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. Ben Carter's letter had shown me the blueprint. My own experience had shown me the method. But this was the destination. The secret at the heart of the maze. Another life, I repeated, the words numb on my tongue. A woman, the whistleblower whispered. Her name is Sarah. Sarah Millerton. She lives in Westport. He's been supporting her for years. There's a property, a condo. It's in a shell company, but he paid for it. And there's a child, a little boy. The air left my lungs in a rush. I sank onto Clara's floral sofa, my legs unable to hold me. A child, a son. While I was signing power of attorneys and playing the part of the dutiful wife, he had been building another family. The hidden passport, the name Robert Shea, it all snapped into a horrifying, clear picture. He hadn't just been siphoning money to protect assets from taxes. He had been funding a parallel existence. How old? I managed to choke out. The boy? He's 7. 7. The number echoed in the hollowed-out chamber of my heart. A 7-year-old boy. Conceived while David and I were still sharing a bed, still hosting Christmas parties, still pretending to be a united front. The betrayal was so vast, so profound, it felt less like an emotion and more like a change in atmospheric pressure. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice a raw scrape. Because I have a daughter, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. And if I were in your shoes, I would want to know. I have documents, spreadsheets, wire transfer records I copied before I left. Arthur Higgins was the one who personally handled the account for the Millerton woman. He knew everything. She agreed to meet me, under conditions of strict secrecy, in a public park the next day. She would bring what she had. When I hung up, I sat in the profound silence of Clara's living room for a long time. The grandfather clock ticked. A car drove by outside. The world continued, utterly oblivious to the nuclear bomb that had just detonated in my soul. When Clara came home from her errands, she found me in the same spot, still as a statue. "Ruth, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked up at her, my vision blurry. "Worse," I whispered. "I've seen the truth." I told her. The woman. The child. The 7 years of lies. Clara's face, usually a mask of stoic competence, crumpled in stages. First disbelief, then dawning horror, and finally, a towering righteous fury. "That bastard," she breathed, her fists clenching at her sides. "That rotten, soulless bastard. And Higgins, that sniveling accomplice." She came and sat beside me, pulling me into a hard, fierce hug. "Oh, my dear girl, I am so sorry." We called Eleanor Vance. I relayed the conversation, my voice flat, robotic, as if reporting on someone else's tragedy. Eleanor listened, and for the first time, I heard a flicker of something other than cold strategy in her voice. It was grim satisfaction. "This is it," she said. "This is the linchpin. A secret family is motive. It explains the cash flow. It undermines Higgins's credibility completely. It paints a picture of a man who was not of sound mind or moral character when he executed that will. We need to meet this woman. We need her evidence." The next day, Lisa drove me to the park. It was a bright, sunny day, cruelly cheerful. We sat on a bench by the duck pond, and a nervous woman in a trench coat, despite the warmth, approached us. She was mousy, plain, her eyes darting around constantly. She didn't give her name. She just handed me a thick manila envelope. "It's all in there," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Bank statements, wire transfers to an account for a St.A. Millerton property deeds for a shell corporation called Mills Holdings, which owns a condo at 42 Harbor View Lane, Westport. There's even a screenshot of a health insurance form where David listed the boy, Ethan Millerton, as a dependent. Higgins's initials are on half these documents as the approving manager." I took the envelope. It felt heavy with the weight of my ruined life. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. "You have no idea." "I think I do," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting second, filled with a shared, terrible understanding. Then she turned and walked quickly away, disappearing into the bright, normal day. Back in the car, Lisa and I didn't speak. We drove back to Clara's in silence. I held the envelope on my lap, a Pandora's box containing the very last of my illusions. I had thought losing my money was the worst of it. I had thought the lawsuit from my son was the deepest cut. But this was the final desecrating act. David hadn't just stolen my present and my future. He had poisoned my past, all of it, turning every memory, every anniversary, every "I love you" into a lie told to a fool. The whistleblower hadn't just given me evidence. She had given me the last, ugly piece of the puzzle. And as I looked at it, the picture that emerged was so monstrous, so complete in its cruelty, that the grief finally, truly, turned to something else, something hard, something sharp, something that could, perhaps, begin to fight back. The envelope sat on Auntie Clara's kitchen table for 2 days. It was a presence in the house, a malevolent totem. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Knowing the truth was one thing. Seeing the proof, the dates, the dollar amounts, the cold, hard evidence of my husband's other life, felt like willingly stepping into a furnace. Eleanor Vance, of course, had no such qualms. She took the documents and devoured them, her flinty eyes gleaming. "This is gold, Ruth, pure gold. We have him. We have Higgins. The probate court will not look kindly on an executor who was actively facilitating the decedent's secret double life. It screams conflict of interest. We can have him removed. We can have the entire will invalidated." Her words were about strategy, about winning. But for me, it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about understanding. How could he? Why? The questions were a worm, eating me from the inside. I had to see her. I had to look the other woman in the eye. "I want to meet her," I told Eleanor. "Absolutely not," she said without hesitation. "It's a terrible idea. It's emotionally volatile. It gives her the power. She could say anything, do anything. It could damage our case." "I don't care about the case right now," I said, and I was surprised by the steel in my own voice. "I care about the truth, my truth. I need to see the woman he chose to build this with. I need to see the child." I looked at Clara, who was listening intently. "I have to." Clara studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded. "She's right, Eleanor. This isn't just legal for her. It's existential. Let her go. But," she added, turning to me, "you don't go alone. Lisa and I are going with you." We wait in the car. "But we're there." Eleanor sighed, a sound of pure professional frustration. "Fine, but you don't say a word about the lawsuit. You don't threaten her. You are a grieving widow who just made a shocking discovery, and you are seeking closure." She spat the word out as if it were distasteful. "Do you understand? You are gathering information, not giving it." So it was arranged. The following Tuesday, Lisa drove Clara and me to Westport. 42 Harbor View Lane was a modern, mid-rise condominium complex with a view of a manicured marina bobbing with sailboats. It was nice, not as grand as our house, but tasteful, expensive. Our money had paid for this view. My security had funded this life. My hands were ice cold. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. "I can't do this," I whispered, staring at the building's entrance. "You can," Clara said from the back seat, her hand on my shoulder. "You walked away from your home. You faced down your son. You can face this. Look her in the eye and see that she's just a woman, a flawed, human woman." Lisa squeezed my hand. "We'll be right here, Mom." The whole time. I took a deep, ragged breath and got out of the car. The walk to the building's entrance felt like a mile. I pressed the buzzer for Unit 312. "Millerton." A woman's voice, young, pleasant. "Hello? Sarah Millerton?" My voice cracked. "Yes? Who is this?" "My name is Ruth Thorne." The silence on the other end was absolute. It stretched on for so long, I thought she'd disconnected. Then, a soft buzz as the door unlocked. The elevator ride to the third floor was a slow ascent into purgatory. The hallway was quiet, carpeted. I found 312. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. She was standing in the middle of the living room, waiting for me. Sarah Millerton was younger than I'd imagined. Late 30s, pretty in a soft, unassuming way. She had kind eyes, and in that moment, they were wide with fear and a staggering depth of guilt. The condo was bright and airy, filled with IKEA furniture and children's toys scattered on the rug. It was a home, a real, lived-in home. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, her voice a whisper. I don't know what to say." "I don't either," I admitted, my gaze sweeping the room. It landed on a gallery wall of photographs. David, looking relaxed, younger, his arm around Sarah. David, holding a toddler with a shock of dark hair. David, with the boy Ethan on his shoulders, both of them laughing. A pain, so acute it was physical, lanced through me. This was the David I never knew. The David without the weight of his public persona, without the pressure to be a titan. He looked happy. "How long?" I asked, my eyes still on the photos. She wrapped her arms around herself. 10 years, we met. He was a client at the gallery where I worked. 10 years, a decade. My entire 50s had been a lie. The boy, Ethan? He's 7. She looked at the floor. David. He loved him so much. The use of the present tense, the raw love in her voice, was another twist of the knife. She was grieving, too. She had lost her partner, the father of her child. The complexity of it was dizzying. "Did you know?" I asked, turning to face her fully. "Did you know he was married? That he had a whole other family?" Tears welled in her eyes. "In the beginning, he told me it was complicated. That you were separated. That it was just a matter of paperwork. By the time I realized the truth, I was in love with him. And then I was pregnant." She looked at me, her expression pleading for an understanding I knew I could never give. "He promised he would leave you. He said once the business was more stable, once Mark was settled, he always had a reason, a timeline. He had used the same playbook on both of us. Promises, delays, manipulations tailored to our vulnerabilities. To me, he was the provider, protecting me from complexity. To her, he was the trapped husband, yearning for freedom." "The money," I said. "The condo." He said it was his investment, that he'd made it separately from his marital assets. "He told me he wanted us to be secure, no matter what." She shook her head, a fresh wave of tears falling. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thorne. You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just loved him. And I believed her." In that moment, I saw her not as a villain, but as another one of David's victims. Another woman whose life he had shaped with his lies. She was a prisoner in this beautiful condo, just as I had been a prisoner in my grand house. We were both inmates in the prison of his making. Just then, a bedroom door opened and a little boy with David's eyes and Sarah's soft mouth came out, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mommy? I'm thirsty." He saw me and stopped, his head tilting in curiosity. "Hello," I said, my voice strangled. "This is a friend of Daddy's," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Go get a drink of water, sweetie." He nodded and padded to the kitchen. I watched him go, this living, breathing testament to my husband's duplicity. He was just a little boy, an innocent. He had lost his father too, and now his financial security was as precarious as mine, tied to the same rotten core. I looked back at Sarah. The anger I had carried with me, the desire to confront and condemn, simply evaporated, leaving behind a vast, desolate landscape of pity for her, for the boy, and for myself. "He's a beautiful boy," I said, and I meant it. Her face crumpled. "What's going to happen to us? The payments, they've stopped. The bank account he set up for us is empty. I got a letter from a lawyer, Arthur Higgins, telling me that any claims I have against the estate are invalid." So Higgins was cutting her off too, tying up loose ends, cleaning up David's mess by throwing the victims to the wolves. "I have a lawyer," I said quietly. "Her name is Eleanor Vance. You should call her." I wrote the number on a scrap of paper from my purse and handed it to her. "Tell her everything. It might help us both." I turned and left without another word. I walked back down the hallway, took the elevator down, and emerged into the bright sunshine. I got into the car where Lisa and Clara were waiting, their faces etched with anxiety. "Well?" Lisa asked, her voice tentative. I looked out the window at the marina, at the happy, normal people living their happy, normal lives. "She's just a woman," I said, echoing Clara's words. "She loved him. And he lied to her, too." The drive home was silent. The war was still raging. The legal battle was ahead. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. The monster I had been fighting had a face now, and it wasn't Sarah's, it was David's. And seeing the full, human wreckage he had left in his wake in me, in my children, in Sarah, in her son, I felt the last vestiges of my love for him finally, irrevocably, die. And in its place, a clear, cold purpose began to grow. It was time to stop being a victim and start being a victor. There is a strange clarity that comes after you have touched the bottom of the abyss and found it to be solid, unforgiving rock. The free fall is over. The terror of the unknown is replaced by the grim certainty of your situation. Meeting Sarah Millerton had been that for me. The last of the phantoms had taken on flesh and blood, and in doing so, had lost their power to haunt me. Now, they were just problems. Terrible, heartbreaking problems, but problems that could be defined, catalogued, and confronted. We held a council of war in Clara's living room. It was me, Clara, Lisa, and Eleanor Vance, who had driven out from the city, her briefcase bulging with the whistleblower's documents and her own preliminary findings. She spread them out on Clara's coffee table, pushing aside a ceramic vase of dried hydrangeas. "Okay," Eleanor began, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Here's the battlefield. On one side, we have Arthur Higgins and Mark, armed with a will that stinks to high heaven, and the presumption of authority that comes with being named executor. They're betting on your exhaustion, Ruth. They're betting you'll run out of money, run out of fight, and settle for whatever crumbs they deign to toss you." She tapped a manicured finger on a stack of financial records. "On our side, we have this. The power of attorney you signed under dubious pretenses. The credit lines taken out in your name. The testimony of Ben Carter, who I've contacted and who is willing to testify about David's pattern of asset hiding. And now, the crown jewel, evidence of a secret second family. Financially supported by David with funds that logically belong to the marital estate, with Arthur Higgins's fingerprints all over the transactions." Lisa, sitting on the floor beside my chair, looked up at Eleanor, her face fierce. "So we can win?" "Win is a relative term in probate court," Eleanor corrected, not unkindly. "But we can achieve our objectives. Our goals are threefold. 1. Have Arthur Higgins removed as executor for gross conflict of interest. 2. have the will thrown out, which would revert the estate to the laws of intestacy, meaning Ruth, as the spouse, gets a significant, legally protected share. And 3. Reclaim the assets that were fraudulently transferred to support this other family, as they rightfully belong to the estate. What about the house? I asked, my voice quiet but steady. If the will is invalidated, the house becomes an asset of the estate. As the surviving spouse, you would have a right to a large portion of its value, if not the property itself, depending on a judge's ruling and any settlement we reach. A settlement. The word felt dirty, like bartering over the pieces of my own life. What do we do first? Clara asked, her arms crossed, a general assessing the map. We go on the offensive, Eleanor said, a glint in her eye. We file a motion to suspend Higgins's powers as executor, pending a full investigation. We attach our evidence as exhibits. We make it so explosive that the judge has no choice but to pay attention. We also file a separate civil suit against Higgins personally, for his role in facilitating the fraud. That will make him very, very nervous. A man like Higgins is all about preserving his own reputation and his own skin. The plan was audacious. It was aggressive. It was everything I had been raised to avoid. Confrontation, scandal, airing our dirty laundry in a public courtroom, but the woman who had been raised that way was gone. She had died in David's office, on her kitchen floor, and in the hallway of a Westport condo. Do it, I said. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I was no longer a passive victim waiting for the next blow to fall. I was an active participant in my own liberation. Eleanor's team became my second home. I spent hours with young, ferociously intelligent associates, reconstructing our life. What car did you drive in 2015? A Mercedes SUV. A GL 450. And who paid the insurance? David. It was all bundled together. Do you recall a vacation to Street Barts in 2017? Yes. We stayed at the Eden Rock. Do you have any photos from that trip? Anything that shows the two of you together, during the time he was also involved with Sarah Millerton? That was the most brutal part. To prove we had a functioning marriage, I had to provide evidence of our life together, even as I was simultaneously proving he was systematically destroying it. I provided photo albums, flight itineraries, emails we'd exchanged about mundane domestic things. Don't forget to let the plumber in. Lisa needs a new dress for the dance. Each one was a tiny paper cut, a reminder of the elaborate theater we had been performing. Meanwhile, Clara was my logistical commander. She handled the media. A few local papers had picked up the story, smelling blood in the water. No comment, was all she would say, her voice like a slamming door. She managed the finances, helping me stretch my dwindling funds to cover Eleanor's mounting bills. She cooked sturdy, comforting meals that I often had no appetite for, but ate anyway, knowing I needed the fuel for the fight. Lisa was my emotional sentry. She fended off calls from Mark, who, after being served with our counter-petition, had oscillated between fury and bewildered attempts at contact. She doesn't want to talk to you, Mark, I heard her say once, her voice cold. Not until you realize whose side you're on. She slept on Clara's couch most nights, a tangible presence of loyalty in the darkness. We were building our war chest. Not just with legal briefs and financial exhibits, but with resolve, with the unshakable knowledge that we were on the right side of this. The first skirmish was a hearing on our motion to suspend Higgins. It was held in a stuffy, wood-paneled probate courtroom that smelled of old paper and anxiety. Mark and Arthur Higgins sat at one table, their lawyer a sleek, silver-haired man who looked like he'd been born in a Brooks Brothers suit beside them. Higgins refused to look at me. Mark shot me a few glances, his expression a confused mix of anger and something that looked like hurt. We sat at the other table, me, Eleanor, and Clara, a line of steel and determination. The judge, a weary-looking woman in her 60s, named Judge Wright, listened as Higgins's lawyer argued that our motion was a baseless, salacious fishing expedition designed to harass a grieving son and a respected financial professional. Then it was Eleanor's turn. She stood, calm and poised. "Your Honor, this is not a fishing expedition. We know what we will find because we have already caught the fish." She held up the envelope from the whistleblower. "We have documentary evidence that Mr. Higgins, while acting as financial advisor to both Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, personally authorized and managed the transfer of marital assets to fund Mr. Thorne's secret, second family. This is not a conflict of interest. This is a conspiracy to defraud a client. Allowing him to remain as executor of the estate from which he helped siphon assets would be a travesty of justice." She presented the judge with a bound booklet of our evidence. The wire transfers, the property deed for the condo, the health insurance form. Judge Wright put on her glasses and read in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sound in the room was the hum of the fluorescent lights and my own pounding heart. She looked up, her gaze settling on Arthur Higgins. "Mr. Higgins," she said, her voice dry as dust. "Can you explain why you were managing a bank account for a S. Millerton, funded by David Thorne, while simultaneously advising Mrs. Thorne on her family's financial planning?" Higgins cleared his throat, a bead of sweat visible on his temple. "Your Honor, I was acting on the instructions of my client, David Thorne. Client confidentiality does not extend to facilitating what appears to be the fraudulent transfer of marital assets," Judge Wright interrupted. "I am granting the motion to suspend your powers as executor, effective immediately. I am appointing a neutral, third-party administrator to oversee the estate pending the outcome of this litigation." She turned her gaze to me. "Mrs. Thorne, the court recognizes the gravity of your allegations. A trial date will be set to adjudicate the validity of the will and the matters before us." It was a victory, a clear, unequivocal victory. Higgins looked like he'd been gut-punched. Mark stared at the table, his shoulders slumped. As we walked out of the courtroom, Eleanor allowed herself a small, tight smile. Phase 1, complete. He's off the board. Now we prepare for trial. Outside on the courthouse steps, Mark caught up to us. "Mom, wait." I turned to face him. He looked young and lost. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice pleading. "About this other woman? This kid?" "I only found out a few weeks ago, Mark," I said, my voice even. "The same way you just did. In a courtroom." He wouldn't," he stammered, his world view cracking. "Dad loved you. He loved our family. He loved control, Mark," I said, a profound sadness washing over me. "And he used all of us to get it. You included." I turned and walked away with Clara and Lisa, leaving my son standing on the courthouse steps, alone with the ruins of the idol he had worshipped. The war wasn't over, but we had captured the high ground. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that peace was not just a distant dream, but a destination we might actually reach. The months between the hearing and the trial were a peculiar form of limbo. The neutral administrator took control of the estate, which meant the stipend stopped, but so did the threat of immediate eviction. I was in stasis, living in Clara's guest room, my life on hold. The fight was all-consuming, a low-grade fever that colored every waking moment. Eleanor was a machine. Her team deposed Arthur Higgins, Mark, and even Chloe. I read the transcripts, my stomach churning. Higgins was evasive, hiding behind client confidentiality and standard financial practices. Mark was defensive, repeating his father's mantra about asset protection and tax strategies, but his certainty was fraying at the edges. Chloe, in her deposition, revealed a stunning venality, talking about maximizing their inheritance and securing little David's future with a coldness that took my breath away. We deposed Sarah Millerton. It was a painful, delicate process. Eleanor was gentle with her, drawing out the story of her relationship with David, the promises he'd made, the way he'd isolated her. She was a powerful witness for our side, not because she was an enemy, but because she was living proof of David's deceit. Her testimony made the abstract crime of financial abuse painfully, humanly real. The trial was set for a bleak Tuesday in February. The world outside was gray and slushy, but the courtroom was overheated, the air thick with tension. This wasn't a quick hearing, this was the main event. The gallery was sparsely populated, a reporter, a few law students, and Auntie Grace, who had come, despite her aversion to conflict, to sit beside Clara and Lisa, a silent pillar of support. The first day was for opening statements. Higgins's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, painted a picture of David as a visionary, a man who made difficult, complex decisions to protect his family's wealth from a litigious world and a financially naive wife. He called the secret family a tragic, personal failing that had no bearing on his sound mind and clear intent as expressed in his will. Then Eleanor stood. She didn't walk to the podium immediately. She stood behind our table, letting her gaze sweep across the judge, the gallery, and finally rest on me. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and carrying. "This case is not about a complex estate. It is not about tax strategies. It is about a lie. A lie so vast and so carefully constructed that it spanned a decade and consumed every person David Thorne claimed to love." She laid out our case like a novelist unfolding a dark plot. The manipulation of a trusting wife. The systematic stripping of her financial identity, the betrayal of a business partner, and, finally, the creation of a secret life, funded by the very wealth he was supposedly protecting. She connected the dots from Ben Carter to the power of attorney to the condo in Westport, with Arthur Higgins as the consistent, enabling thread. "We will show you that the document presented as David Thorne's last will and testament is the final act of that lie," she concluded. "It is the instrument by which he sought to permanently punish his wife for his own infidelities and to reward the son who agreed to become his accomplice. We ask this court to see it for what it is, a fraud." The battle was joined. The days that followed were a grueling parade of evidence and testimony. Ben Carter took the stand, his voice thick with the old, weathered pain as he described the destruction of his business and his friendship. The whistleblower testified via video link. Her face blurred, her voice modulated, but her testimony about Higgins's direct involvement was chillingly clear. And then, it was my turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking a plank. I took the oath, my hand on the Bible, and met Eleanor's steady gaze. She took me through it all, from the beginning. The early days of my marriage, my trust in David, my gradual relinquishment of control. She had me describe the day I signed the power of attorney, the canceled credit cards, the discovery of the hidden will. I spoke calmly, clearly, though my insides were quivering. I was not the emotional, hysterical woman Higgins' side had tried to portray. I was a historian, recounting the fall of an empire. Then, Eleanor approached me with the photograph from Sarah's wall, the one of David, relaxed and happy, holding a toddler Ethan on a beach. "Mrs. Thorne, do you recognize the man in this photograph?" "Yes, that's my husband David." "And do you recognize the child?" "No, I do not." "When was the first time you saw this photograph?" "About 6 months ago. In the home of Sarah, Millerton." "And what was the date, according to the metadata, that this photograph was taken?" "June 15th, 7 years ago, our wedding anniversary." David told me he was at a financial conference in Chicago. A ripple went through the courtroom. The mundane, specific cruelty of it was more powerful than any legal argument. Mr. Sterling's cross-examination was brutal but clumsy. He tried to paint me as a spendthrift, asking about my Lexus, my vacations, my designer clothes. I didn't deny any of it. "That was the life David built for me, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice gaining strength. "He wanted a wife who looked a certain way, lived in a certain house, represented a certain success. I played my part. I didn't realize it was all being funded with debt taken out in my name, while he hid the real assets to support his other family. He had no response. The climax came when Mark was called to the stand by his own lawyer. He testified about his father's confidence in him, his belief that he was doing what was best for the family. But when Eleanor stood for cross-examination, she dismantled him, not with aggression, but with a relentless, quiet logic. Mr. Thorne, when you pressured your mother to sign over her rights to the family home, were you aware that your father had a 7-year-old son with another woman? Mark looked down. No. When you agreed to be a co-executor with Mr. Higgins, were you aware that Mr. Higgins had been managing the finances for that other woman and child? No. When you sued your mother to evict her, were you aware that the financial strategies you cited were, in fact, funding a separate, hidden life? No, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't know any of that. My father, he told me she couldn't handle it. He told me she would waste it, that she was too emotional. He said I was the only one he could trust. And you believed him, Eleanor said, not as a question, but as a statement of tragic fact. Mark looked over at me, and for the first time, I saw not a calculating adversary, but my lost, heartbroken son. The armor of his father's lies was finally, completely, shattered. He put his face in his hands and began to cry, deep, ragged sobs that echoed in the silent courtroom. There were no more questions. The trial didn't end with a dramatic bang. It ended with closing arguments, a recitation of facts and law. But the truth had already been told. It was in Ben Carter's weary eyes, in the whistleblower's fearful testimony, in Sarah's quiet grief, in my son's broken sobs, and in my own steady recounting of a life lived in a cage of someone else's design. Judge Wright promised a ruling in a few weeks. As we filed out of the courtroom, Mark approached me, his face ravaged by tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I looked at my son, this young man who had been so terribly used by the father he adored. The anger I had felt towards him melted away, leaving only a vast, aching pity. I believe you, Mark, I said softly. But I didn't know doesn't fix what's broken. We have a long way to go. I walked out of the courthouse between Clara and Lisa, the winter air feeling clean and sharp in my lungs. The battle was over. We had laid out the truth, every ugly, painful inch of it. The verdict was out of our hands now, but for the first time in years, my hands felt like my own. I had spoken my truth, and in that act, I had already begun to reclaim myself. Whatever the judge decided, I knew I would never again be the woman who signed a paper without reading it, who accepted a lie because it was easier than facing a fight. I had faced the fight, and I was still standing. Winning, I discovered, feels an awful lot like losing when the victory is built upon the ruins of your own life. Judge Wright's ruling came down 3 weeks later. It was a complete and total vindication. The will was invalidated due to undue influence and a pattern of deceit. Arthur Higgins was permanently barred from acting as an executor in the state and was facing his own disbarment hearings. The estate, including the house, was to be divided according to the laws of intestacy, granting me, as the surviving spouse, a legally substantial share. The assets David had funneled to Sarah Millerton were to be returned to the marital estate, though the judge, in a touch of humanity, allowed her to keep the condo, recognizing her and her son as unintended victims. We had won. By every legal and moral metric, we had won. So why did I feel so hollow? The first check from the estate administrator was for a sum of money that should have felt staggering. It was more than I had ever personally possessed in my life. I held the check, the numbers blurring before my eyes. It felt like blood money. Compensation for 28 years of my life, for the trust I had given so freely, for the love that had been used as a weapon against me. I deposited it into a new account, in my name only, and felt nothing but a cold, leaden weight in the pit of my stomach. The house on Crestview Drive was sold. Mark, shattered and remorseful, signed the papers without a word of protest. He and Chloe had separated. The pressure of the trial and the revelation of his father's true nature had fractured their brittle foundation. He moved into a small apartment, and the few times I spoke to him, his voice was flat, devoid of the ambition and certainty that had once defined him. We were polite, distant, like two survivors of a shipwreck who can't quite look each other in the eye. With the proceeds from the house and the liquidated assets, I was, by any definition, a wealthy woman. I paid Auntie Clara a generous sum for her hospitality, which she reluctantly accepted only after I insisted it was for my own dignity. I repaid Lisa for all the expenses she had covered. I settled the massive debts David had taken out in my name. And then I stopped. I rented a small, furnished apartment near Clara's. It was beige and anonymous, with thin carpets and the faint smell of other people's cooking. I bought a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a sofa. That was it. The rest of the room stood empty. I had no desire to fill them. The energy required to choose a lampshade, a rug, a piece of art, felt Herculean. Every decision seemed to carry the ghost of a previous one, a reminder of the life I had so carefully, so foolishly, curated. The days were long and featureless. I would wake up and lie in bed for hours, listening to the traffic outside, the sound of a life moving on without me. I had fought so hard for this freedom. And now that I had it, I had no idea what to do with it. The fight had been my purpose. It had given me a structure, a reason to get up, an enemy to focus on. Now the enemy was gone, and I was left alone with the quiet, devastating wreckage. I stopped seeing Eleanor Vance. Our business was concluded. I stopped talking to the forensic accountants. The war was over. The soldiers had gone home. Lisa tried to pull me out of it. She would drag me to movies, to quiet restaurants. I would go, I would sit, I would pick at my food, and I would answer her questions in monosyllables. I could see the worry in her eyes, a mirror of the concern I had once felt for her. The roles had reversed. Mom, you need to get out of this apartment. You have money now. You can travel. You can go back to school. You can do anything you want. I would just nod. I know, honey, soon. But I didn't mean it. The world outside my beige apartment seemed too bright, too loud, too full of demands I couldn't meet. The thought of planning a trip, of navigating an airport, of being in a new place, was utterly exhausting. The thought of studying something, of having to learn and absorb, felt like trying to run a marathon with lead weights tied to my feet. This was the depression Clara had warned me about. The crash after the adrenaline. She called it the weight of the ashes. You've been running on fury and fear for a year, Ruth, she said one evening, sitting in one of my 2 chairs. The body and the mind can only do that for so long. Now the battle is over, and you have to feel everything you didn't have time to feel before. The grief, the betrayal, the loss. It's all here now, in this quiet room, and it's heavy. She was right. The grief was no longer a sharp, stabbing pain. It was a vast, gray ocean, and I was drowning in it. I grieved for the husband I thought I had. I grieved for the son I had lost, not to death, but to deception. I grieved for the years I had wasted, for the person I might have been if I hadn't handed the reins of my life to David so willingly. I would find myself standing in the middle of the empty living room, tears streaming down my face for no reason I could name. I was free. I was safe. I was secure. And I had never been more miserable. I was invited to a support group for women who had experienced financial abuse. I went once. I listened to their stories that echoed my own with a chilling familiarity. The hidden accounts, the controlled allowances, the eroded confidence. When it was my turn to speak, I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I just shook my head and left, the sympathetic eyes of the other women feeling like accusations. The money in the bank felt like a taunt. What was it for? It couldn't buy back my time. It couldn't restore my trust. It couldn't heal the fracture between me and my son. It was just a number on a screen, a monument to a battle that had left me wounded on the field, victorious but broken. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the full-length mirror on the back of the bedroom door. I looked at the woman staring back at me. She was 54 now. Her hair had more gray. There were new lines around her eyes and mouth, etched not from laughter, but from sorrow and stress. Her shoulders were slightly stooped, as if carrying the weight of the ashes had permanently altered her posture. "Who are you?" I asked the reflection. The reflection had no answer. I had spent a year fighting to be Ruth Thorne again. But the Ruth Thorne I had been was gone, a construct built for and by David. I had no idea who was left in her place. The victory had given me back my money, my name, my legal rights, but it had not given me back myself. That, it seemed, was a separate war altogether, and I had no strength left to fight it. I was adrift in a sea of ashes, and I had forgotten how to swim. The turning point came not with a bang, but with a leaky faucet. The drip, drip, drip in the kitchen of my beige apartment, a persistent, maddening percussion that underscored the silence. For 2 days, I listened to it, each drop a tiny hammer blow on my frayed nerves. I could have called the superintendent. I had the money to hire a plumber. But the effort of picking up the phone, of explaining the problem, of scheduling a time, felt insurmountable. On the 3rd day, something in me snapped. It wasn't a dramatic break. It was a quiet, final surrender to the sheer absurdity of my situation. I was a woman who had faced down lawyers and corrupt financiers and the devastating truth of her own marriage, and I was being held hostage by a faucet. I went to the local hardware store. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the aisles a confusing labyrinth of unfamiliar objects. I stood in the plumbing section, staring at a wall of washers and O-rings and valve stems, feeling utterly defeated. An elderly clerk with kind eyes and grease under his fingernails approached me. "You look lost, dear. What seems to be the trouble?" His simple question, his gentle tone, undid me. To my utter horror, I burst into tears right there between the pipe wrenches and the drain snakes. I stood sobbing, trying to explain about the drip, but the words wouldn't come. The clerk, whose name was Frank, didn't flinch. He handed me a bandana from his back pocket and waited. When my sobs subsided into hiccups, he said, "It's never just the faucet, is it?" I shook my head, wiping my eyes. "Tell you what," he said. "You point to the style of faucet you have, and I'll get you the washer you need, and I'll tell you how to fix it. It's easier than you think." And he did. He gave me a $3 package of washers and drew me a diagram on a scrap of paper. I went home, turned off the water under the sink, and with hands that trembled only slightly, I dismantled the faucet. I replaced the worn, rubber washer with a new one, following Frank's diagram. I reassembled it, turned the water back on, and held my breath. The dripping had stopped. The silence that followed was profound. But it was a different silence. It was no longer empty. It was full of a single simple accomplishment. I had fixed it. I had fixed it. A small, stupid thing, but it was mine. I had identified a problem, sought a solution, and executed it all by myself. That tiny victory, that minuscule reclamation of agency, was the crack in the dam. The next day, I went back to the hardware store and bought a gallon of paint. Not beige. A soft, warm color called sea salt. I painted one wall of the living room. It took me all day. I got paint in my hair, on my clothes, but when I was done, I sat on the floor and looked at that wall. It was beautiful. It was a choice I had made. It was a change I had enacted. I called Auntie Grace. "Grace," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "Do you remember that artist retreat you told me about? In Maine? The one on the coast?" There was a startled silence on the other end. "The Salty Pines? Of course, I remember. I've been begging you to go for months. I think I'd like to go, for a week, maybe 2. I booked it that afternoon. It wasn't a grand, European tour. It was a quiet place where you could rent a small cabin, with no television and spotty internet, and just be. A week later, I was packing a single suitcase. Lisa drove me to the train station, her face alight with a hope she'd been afraid to show. "Are you sure you'll be okay, Mom? All alone?" "I think," I said, kissing her cheek, "that being alone is exactly what I need." The journey north was a meditation. I watched the dense suburban landscape gradually give way to rocky coastline and dense, green pine forests. The air, when I stepped off the train in the small town of Rock Haven, was cold and sharp, scented with salt and balsam fir. It smelled like a world away. My cabin was exactly as promised. One room, with a wood stove, a small kitchenette, and a bed tucked under a sloping ceiling. The window looked out over a rocky cove, where the Atlantic Ocean crashed and sighed against the land. The sound was constant, immense, and somehow comforting in its indifference to my small human troubles. For the first 3 days, I did nothing. I slept. I walked along the shore, my hands shoved in the pockets of an old jacket I'd bought at a thrift store. I collected smooth, gray stones and bits of sea glass. I sat on a driftwood log and watched the gulls wheel and cry in the sky. I didn't think about David, or the lawsuit, or the money. I just existed. I felt the wind on my face. I tasted the salt on my lips. I listened to the waves. The frantic, tangled knot of thoughts in my head began slowly to loosen. The gray ocean of my depression began to recede, replaced by the real, vast, blue-gray ocean in front of me. On the 4th day, I met an old woman who was also staying at the retreat. Her name was Maeve, and she was a potter. She found me on the beach, staring out at the horizon. "You look like you're waiting for a message from the sea," she said, her voice raspy and warm. "Maybe I am," I replied. She invited me to her studio, a converted boathouse filled with clay and the smell of wet earth. She handed me a lump of cool, gray clay. "Here, don't think, just feel." I sat at the wheel, my hands clumsy and uncertain. The clay was resistant at first, then pliable, then it collapsed into a messy, formless puddle. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in over a year. I tried again, and again. For hours I sat there, my hands covered in mud, failing spectacularly at making a simple bowl. And with each failure, I felt a little lighter. There was no right or wrong here. No judge to rule, no lawyer to impress. There was only the clay, the wheel, and the trying. I didn't find God on that rocky coast. I didn't have a dramatic, life-altering epiphany. But I found small things. I found the satisfaction of splitting my own firewood. I found the taste of tomato soup made from a can, eaten while watching a storm roll in over the water. I found the courage to sit in a silence that was no longer frightening, but peaceful. I was reading a book one evening by the light of an oil lamp when a sentence seemed to leap off the page and settle deep inside me. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to cope with it. I set the book down. The ability to cope with it. I had coped. I had coped with betrayal, with loss, with financial ruin, with the unraveling of my family. I had fought. I had fallen apart. And now I was sitting in a quiet cabin, listening to the rain on the roof, and I was okay. I was still here. On my last morning, I walked down to the cove at sunrise. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the water calm. I held one of the smooth stones I had collected, its surface worn to a perfect, cool smoothness by the endless, patient work of the sea. I thought of my own life, all its sharp, jagged edges, its fractures and cracks. The past year had been a violent tumbling, a crashing against hard realities. It had been painful. It had been brutal. But as I stood there, the first rays of the sun warming my face, I realized the process had also worn me smooth. The Ruth who was obsessed with perfection, with appearances, with being the perfect wife for a perfect man in a perfect house that Ruth had been shattered. The woman standing on the beach was simpler, stronger in the broken places. She knew how to fix a faucet. She knew how to sit with her own silence. She knew that peace wasn't a destination you arrived at, but a muscle you learned to flex. I threw the stone into the water. It disappeared with a soft plunk, sending ripples out across the still surface. I didn't need to hold onto it anymore. I turned my back on the cove and walked up the path to the cabin, ready to pack my bag. I wasn't returning to my old life. I was going home to build a new one. The geography of peace, I had learned, wasn't a place on a map. It was the landscape you cultivated inside yourself, no matter where you were. If you had told me, 2 years ago, that I would find my greatest happiness in a small, suburban backyard with dirt under my fingernails, I would have laughed in your face. My old life was one of manicured lawns and landscaped gardens, maintained by a crew of men who came every Thursday. I never touched the soil. It was considered unseemly. Now, as I kneel in my own patch of earth, the rich, dark scent of compost filling my senses, I feel more connected to the world, more grounded, more real, than I ever did amidst the marble and mahogany. I bought this little bungalow with the last of the estate money. It's not in a gated community. The floors creak, the windows are drafty, and the backyard is just that, a yard. But it's mine, every shingle, every nail, every blade of grass. The deed is in my name, and Ruth Thorne is the only signature that mattered. That simple fact is a daily, quiet joy. The journey to this peace was not a straight line. Coming back from Maine, the world still felt too loud for a while. The memory of the sea was a touchstone, but the cacophony of traffic, the glare of supermarket lights, the sheer pace of everything was a shock to a system that had learned to appreciate silence. I had to learn to carry the peace of that rocky cove within me, like a secret talisman. The first thing I did was find a therapist. Not a support group, but a one-on-one, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Evans who didn't let me get away with anything. She was the one who helped me untangle the final, knotted threads of guilt. The guilt for not seeing David's deception sooner. The guilt for the rift with Mark. The guilt for simply surviving when it felt like my entire world had died. You were not his accomplice, Ruth, she told me in one of our early sessions. You were his target. There is a profound difference. He designed a life that would keep you dependent and trusting. Your trust was not a character flaw. It was the very tool he used against you. It took months for me to truly believe that, to stop replaying moments in my head, looking for clues I must have missed. Dr. Evans called it hindsight bias. I called it self-flagellation. Slowly, with her guidance, I learned to close the book on the past. Not to forget it, that would be impossible and unwise, but to stop allowing it to dictate every present moment. The garden was Dr. Evans's idea, in a way. Find something that requires patience, she'd said. Something that forces you to be present, that has its own timeline, independent of your own anxiety. So, I started with a packet of sunflower seeds. I didn't know the first thing about gardening. I overwatered them. I planted them in a spot that didn't get enough sunday. Half of them died. But the ones that struggled through, that pushed their way up through the stubborn clay soil of my new yard. When they finally opened their great, sunny faces to the world, I felt a surge of pride so pure it brought tears to my eyes. I had nurtured that life. I had failed and tried again, and it had worked. The garden grew from there. Now, I have raised beds for tomatoes, cucumbers, and beans. I have a herb garden by the kitchen door, rosemary, thyme, and basil whose scent fills the air on warm evenings. It's not always successful. The rabbits got my lettuce. A late frost nipped the peppers. But the failures don't feel like they used to. They're not moral indictments. They're just gardening. You learn, you adapt, you try again next season. This philosophy has seeped into the rest of my life. My relationship with Mark is a tender shoot, still fragile, but green with promise. He comes over for dinner every other Sunday. The first few times were awkward, filled with long silences and conversations that skated carefully over the surface of things. He was carrying his own burden of guilt, a heavy one. "I looked up to him so much, Mom," he confessed one evening, helping me weed the tomato patch. His hands, so like his father's, were clumsy in the dirt. I wanted to be just like him. I thought his way was the only way to be a man, to be successful. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know you did, Mark," I said, my own hands stilling. "And he knew you would, he counted on it." It was a painful truth, but a necessary one. We are learning each other again, not as mother and son in a script written by David, but as two adults who have been through a war and are figuring out how to be allies in the peace. He's in therapy, too. He started a small tech consulting business, something entirely his own, separate from his father's shadow. I am prouder of him for that than I ever was of any of his father's grand achievements. Lisa is my rock, my joy. She moved her art studio into my sunroom, and the house is often filled with the smell of turpentine and the sound of her music. She is flourishing, her spirit unbroken by the darkness we endured. In fact, I think it made her stronger. She sees the world with a clear, compassionate eye that I am in awe of. And then there is the question of the future, of companionship. It's a thought that would have terrified the old Ruth. The very idea of trusting a man again felt like a ludicrous fantasy. But the woman I am now knows that my value, my security, does not come from another person, it comes from me. From this house, this garden, this bank account, I manage myself with the help of a lovely, straightforward female financial planner who explains every fee. I've even started dating, in a slow, cautious way. His name is Henry. He's a retired history teacher I met at the local library. He has a kind face and doesn't seem to mind my silences. On our third date, I told him. Not the whole, sordid story, but the bones of it. My first husband, it didn't end well. He was not the man I thought he was. Henry listened, his intelligent eyes soft. Then he said, "Well, I'm just a retired teacher who likes birdwatching and bad puns. What you see is pretty much what you get, I promise." It was the most comforting thing anyone has ever said to me. So, this is my life now. It is small, by my old standards. It is simple. There are no galas, no platinum cards, no society pages. My greatest excitement this week was seeing the first ripe tomato on the vine. But it is a life of profound authenticity. Every choice is mine. Every mistake is mine. Every joy is mine. The peace I have gained is not the absence of trouble. Lord knows, there are still bills to pay, and worries about Mark, and days when the memory of David's betrayal rises up like a ghost. But the peace is in the knowing. Knowing that I can handle it. Knowing that I have a voice, and it is loud and clear. Knowing that my worth is not tied to my net worth, or to any man's opinion. If I could go back and talk to that woman sobbing on the floor of her walk-in closet, surrounded by the evidence of her ruin, I would hold her. And I would tell her this: the world as you know it is ending. It is going to hurt more than you can possibly imagine. You will lose almost everything you thought defined you. But you, Ruth, the core of you, the spirit that he tried so hard to extinguish, you will survive. You will be broken open, and the light will pour in. And on the other side of this agony, you will find a strength you never knew you had, and a peace so deep and so quiet, it will feel like coming home after a very, very long journey. This is my garden of wisdom, cultivated from the bitter seeds of betrayal. And the lessons I've harvested are these. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Do not let anyone, no matter how much you love them, convince you that your reality is not real. Always, always have your own. Your own money, your own name on the deed, your own passport, your own credit. Independence is not a lack of love. It is the foundation of a healthy partnership. It is never too late to start over. 53, 63, 73. Your life is not a book with its final chapters already written. You can pick up a new pen and begin a new story anytime you choose. And, finally, the most important lesson of all, Peace is not a prize you win at the end. It is not the final, quiet chapter after the drama is over. Peace is a choice you make, moment by moment. It is choosing to plant a seed and wait. It is choosing to forgive your son. It is choosing to sit in the sun and feel its warmth on your skin, without guilt, without agenda. It is choosing yourself. Over and over again. I lost the big house, the glittering social circle, the illusion of a perfect life. I lost everything that was never truly mine to begin with. But in the losing, I found myself. And in finding myself, I gained a peace that cannot be bought, sold, or stolen, a peace that is, finally and forever, my own. And that, my dear friends, is everything. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.